We're just going to give folks a few more minutes to hop on, and we'll go ahead and kind of start now. People have already been utilizing the chat, but everyone's attendee cameras and microphones are turned off. But please do ask us questions in the chat, and we'll do our best to answer them either during the presentation or at the end. And yeah, I just wanted to say thank you so much for joining us. We're really thrilled to have Dave Manger from Roots and Shoots Nursery here with us today to teach us about pollinators and how to make a pollinator garden. So it's a topic I'm really eager to learn about from Dave. So it's going to be a really fun presentation. Dave, would you like to? I'm Beverly Roberts. I'm the Operations and Communications Manager here at SCWF. I've been here about 3 years, and it's just wonderful to be able to be involved in our mission. And we do so many different great things at SCWF. And one of them is this Wild Webinar Wednesday series. So, Dave, would you like to introduce yourself a little bit?
Sure. Hey, everybody. I'm Dave Manger, owner of Roots and Shoots Nursery, and we're down in Charleston, the low country of South Carolina. And should I take it from here?
I was going to say, I thought your background was really interesting too. Would you mind telling people what you studied in school?
Yeah, I went to school for bioengineering, which is kind of a little bit of a confusing subject, but just about the time I was graduating, I realized I didn't really want to be sitting behind a computer forever. So I graduated, and then I did kind of some exploring and adventuring, and I eventually wound up in Charleston and getting started with all of this.
Wonderful.
But yeah, I hike the Appalachian Trail. I'm a master naturalist here, and then I also do a lot of permaculture kind of minded things. That's how I started getting into all this stuff in the beginning.
Cool. All right. Well, I think we'll just let you take it away, Dave, and I'll interrupt with some questions throughout the presentation, and we'll just kind of learn together.
Sounds great. So here we go. Again, Dave Manger, Roots and Shoots Nursery, and here we are. You could always jump on our website too. I know she's recording with SCWF, and then you could also see this presentation on our site if you are looking for some extra notes at the end. But yeah, we're located in Charleston in the Low Country, and even though we'll be talking about all the ins and outs of pollinator gardens, and along the way I'm going to have lots of different plants to show off and explain. Don't worry if you're from up in the mountains or somewhere else, because a lot of these plants are really cosmopolitan, which means their native ranges are way up into Canada, all the way down into Florida, and all over the place. So I think pretty much everything we'll talk about is going to be applicable to everybody here. Aside from my school and stuff like that, our beginnings was a sustainable landscaping company, and I started that about 10 years ago when I got into Charleston. And what I would do is I'd go out, meet clients, and we'd come up with a cool plan for their yard and a big plant selection. And then when it came time to actually find the plants, I would have to drive all over the place and search high and low. And oftentimes I'd end up having to substitute out a lot of things and just making a lot of unwanted changes to make the garden work. So I saw the problem right away, and I dealt with it for a bit. And eventually I met up with some ladies, Jane and Lynn, who had a little backyard nursery here in Charleston, and they specialized in native plants, as we do. And that would help quite a bit. But again, it was still a backyard nursery and a little bit limited. But after a year or so, they kind of decided to officially retire. And I took that opportunity to add Roots and Shoots to my landscaping services. And then I was both landscaping and growing, which at the end of the day, it's a very busy thing to do. But it was also really great because I no longer was having to search all over the place to find all the plants I wanted. So staying really busy, growing and growing and growing. The pictures here on the left and the middle here are pictures of my backyard back in the day. And eventually, after a couple of years, the amount of plants I had in that backyard, it was like 40 feet by 30 feet, so pretty tiny. But there was just like a little narrow walkway to get in and out. And much to the approval of my wife, I decided to move to a brick and mortar location. And I took that jump. And today we're much, much bigger than we were in the early days. And we're here in West Ashley in Charleston. Um, and largely native plants are becoming much more trendy than they ever were before. Here locally, I like to think at least we had something to do with that. But everybody in general is just becoming a little bit more aware of the environmental impacts of developing and things like that. So we're in a good spot. And we differ quite a bit from some regular garden centers in the fact that we try to keep all of our species available year round, instead of when they're just blooming. And that way any sort of garden designer or gardener, when they come in, they could design a garden that is useful and not just blooming in spring when maybe you made your shopping trip and things like that. We also really try hard to make just native plants as a whole a lot more accessible, with the remembrance of how much struggle I had in the early days. So we have tons of different species. We have lots of like straight species, which are seedlings and kind of local genetics of plants. And then we have lots of cultivars as well. So we're kind of trying to meet the needs of all the gardeners out there that are interested in natives and aren't quite sure how to hop into that bit. So we sell wholesale to our landscapers and our designers, but our early beginnings are certainly a retail bit. So we do a lot of that. And on the map here, you can see a kind of an aerial footage of the back of our shop, and then here's the front, and then another snap of the front on this kind of a busy little day. But also, I think in my mind, a lot of folks interested in new plants could kind of hit a speed bump when they're trying to figure out what it is, where it might grow, what it's going to look like. And so we have tons of signage. I think that's really important, and make sure we have a really knowledgeable staff that could kind of help people out. So I know we're in Charleston, people are all over the place, but I'm sure most of you have a native plant, whether native plant garden center, whether it be a backyard or maybe something bigger. But don't be shy about trying to find those people, and they'll help you out in a big way.
Yeah, and I
Today,
think a
yeah,
lot of the native plant nurseries listed on our website. So I'll pop that into the chat too, so
oh great,
folks can see what's close to them.
perfect. Today we're talking about the pollinator gardens. Like I said, all the ins and outs of it, and then as a gardener, kind of that mindset that we really try to get people in when they're starting to get into native plants and working with wildlife and insects, and really a lot of exciting things that might show up in our yards because of it. Um, and then finally, at the tail end, the big majority of it all is going to be how we might pick out our site for it, what plants we might want to use, how we would design and install it, and then finally, kind of that maintenance component of making sure it's going to be a good garden in perpetuity. So pollinator gardens are just what everybody imagines they are. They're thoughtfully designed spaces that are filled with native plants that could supply nectar and then a lot of other resources for our pollinators through every single step of their life cycle, so they could stick around. And that means all seasons of flowers, not just having a big show in the spring and then having kind of evergreen stuff along the way. When we're stepping out of our door and into our garden, there's kind of like two big polar opposites of like who we might be as a gardener. And the first one is complete domination of everything that's going in and out of our garden. As humans, we're big and we're powerful, and we have pretty much every means at our fingertips to poison or control or plow or bulldoze or hardscape or whatever, to those little pieces of land that we have around us. And my favorite examples are always English gardens. So even the bushes aren't allowed to be circular or natural; they're kept in geometric forms. And this one, I guess this picture has a couple flowers in there, but more often than not, they're pretty empty of anything but some green plants that are trying to be bigger than they want to be. Other side of that spectrum is going to be the hands-off gardener, and that is the person that kind of peeks out their window. And sees what's growing, but they don't really go out there. I know everybody here is interested in pollinator gardens because you're here. So we're probably all of us right in the middle of that spectrum. And my goal is to kind of get everybody a little bit more kind of on this hands-off side of things. So
Cool.
as a garden facilitator, which is what we're trying to be, my my view is that we look at our garden inhabitants and think of them as our neighbors. And in order to have any good thriving neighborhood, we want to make sure it's like a vibrant community, it's energetic, it's got lots of like really cool things in it. And to do so, we really want to step into our gardens and create this big framework that is going to then we're going to be able to let go of and kind of see what shows up and see what happens, and then resist that temptation to go in there and like kick somebody out or poison something or or try to keep the leaves from being eaten and things like that. So always when we're working with our native plants, we're looking for balance and not perfection. When we see things that are eaten and stuff like that, we're doing a good job.
I like that. That's a good way to say that. That yeah. And we are already getting a couple of questions. One
Sure.
person wants to know the best way to help our pollinator friends and avoid sneaky ways that may harm them, like avoiding um, neon. I'm not even sure how to pronounce that.
Yeah. Yeah, neonics is usually what people are
Yes.
calling them,
Okay.
but yeah, that's like the systemic insecticides that
Okay.
the insects would eat, and then they think they got a meal, but then they're dead.
Gotcha.
So often a lot of the big box stores and just really big growers, they have a lot of things to look after, and their quick solution is just to spray everything, and if everything's got poison in it, nothing's going to eat it. So when it comes to a garden center, or or if they're growing their own, when it comes out to the sale floor, it's going to look perfect for a gardener. And um, usually that's not great because you're going home with a pretty flower. But again, you're not going to really be helping anybody, um, and maybe even tricking a lot of insects into thinking it's like a wonderland. Um, Never hurts to ask, I think, at a garden center what they're using. These days, especially, there's like been a lot of bad rap on neonics and a lot of press on it lately. So I think they're becoming slowly but surely uh, pushed along to the wayside, and we're doing things a little bit more friendly as a whole as a nursery. But ask away. We sell a lot of obviously we sell a lot of native plants, but our host plants specifically are the caterpillar food, and we've taken to growing most of that ourselves. And if we are ever going to work with another grower, we ask and ask and ask again, just to make sure that we're not going to be accidentally giving somebody's caterpillar some food and they're going to croak. Um, not that it's a good thing, but if you're only having like one or two options and you do have to get a plant and you're not really sure if it's been insecticided in any fashion, you do
Mhm.
always have kind of the long game you could play. So if you're planting something in your yard, those systemic insecticides aren't going to be in there forever. Sometimes they're in there for a really long time, sometimes even up to like a year. But eventually, that plant is going to start. If it's a perennial, it's going to start servicing and providing for the ecosystem. So try not to do that. But if you have to do it and you're trying to get an ecologically friendly garden going without any other options, a, a native plant and a plant that's providing nectar is still good in the long run. Um, but don't spray them yourself. And mosquito spraying is really popular here, probably all over South Carolina. That's a really tricky one because that is usually kind of broad spectrum killers. So so I know in our county we can call and get on a list. So they stop the spraying truck when the county's doing it. I'm sure a lot of you elsewhere would have that option as well. Um, Good there. Should we keep on moving?
Yep, I think
Okay.
so.
All right. So we're about to get into all the fine details of creating a really great pollinator garden. But in the end, I don't want anybody to forget that they're really easy as at the heart of it all. So you can just go to any sort of like reputable nursery and shut your eyeballs and just go pick out 10 plants. If you find a sunny patch in your yard and put them in and they're growing flowers, then you are the proud owner and the proud creator of a pollinator garden. Uh, Obviously, we could do better than that, but you can still do it. So one thing I think everybody should always keep in mind too is to have a lot of fun with this and don't get too frustrated or caught up in any single details, because you're going to be doing a really good thing one way or the other. And so now we get into the actual planned and thoughtful pollinator garden components. So the first one is going to be site selection. And this is the one slider. This as a whole has lots of wiggle room, but technically speaking, the most ideal site for a pollinator garden is going to be in full sun. And there's a pretty strong correlation between flowers and sunlight. So the more sun you have, the more flowers you're going to be able to have, and then more nectar and pollen and all the other resources that most of our pollinators are looking for. And then kind of just average yard all around. So you don't want it to be too wet, you don't want it to be too dry, somewhere in the middle. Same for your soils. You want them to be kind of like right there in the middle. And there's always room with your plant selection to kind of adapt it. If you're a little bit on the wet side or you're a little bit on the dry side, you could still build yourself a really nice pollinator garden. But I'd say these days resources abound, and everything you're going to read says like full sun, full sun, full sun, but not necessarily. Plant selection is a biggie. We'll go, this is kind of quick overview, but we'll talk about why we want to use native plants, the importance of having a big diverse array of plants in your gardens, using caterpillars, host plants, and then also trying to create gardens that have a lot of vertical interest in them for hiding and other habitat kind of building. The first one, and this is probably the most important one. If you guys haven't heard of Doug Tallamy, he's kind of like the best in terms of like science writing and creating a really well thoughtful focus on why we want to use native plants. Really great writer, really speaks to people's hearts. And so read his books. He's got a couple out there. Nature's Best Hope, I think, is the latest really good one. So check them out. But in a very, very, very small nutshell, we want to use native plants because our native plants have been around for a very long time, and so have all of our native insects and animals. And before us humans were around, they did a perfectly good job at supporting all of the life around nature. So plants don't want to be eaten either. And okay, yeah, a couple people wrote Doug Tallamy, that's the name. But plants don't want to be eaten, so they have a lot of really nasty chemical defenses built within themselves to prevent that from happening. And over time, a lot of our insects have figured out how to bypass those chemical defenses, and that is why they're able to eat specific plants versus maybe you have some plants from like Japan or China. Down here in Charleston, we have a lot of that stuff, camellias and azalea, the Indian azaleas and crepe myrtles and things like that. So plants that don't come from here typically have these chemical defenses that aren't really penetrable by our native animals, and so those are not useful at all. I think he kind of likens them to like a plastic plant out in your yard. So we're looking for seeds, berries, leaves, nuts, fruits. Also, we're looking for habitat, hiding places, places to breed, like old sticks and things like that you could lay your eggs in, and all sorts of goodies around your garden. Natives are also really easy with the mantra that right plant for the right place. So as long as you're looking up those plant details and you see that one needs full sun and dry soil, and you're putting it there, more often than not, you're going to be able to set those plants out, get them established, and then pretty much be hands-free of them and be confident that they're going to thrive in that space and provide all the services that we want. Here in the Low Country, we're Zone 9, which is kind of like this mixing pot of tropical stuff and then a lot of more temperate plants as well. I know as you guys get up a little bit to the mountain range, we start to change a little bit. But down here we have a lot of water issues. So our plants below in the low country have a lot of them have an ability to handle salt. A lot of them could handle really dry and sandy conditions. And you could pretty much find whatever condition is in your yard here in South Carolina. Um, you could find a native plant to that area that's going to be able to be very, very happy in that location. They're also beautiful, especially these days with just the pure availability of native plants. You're able to find all sorts of uh, flowers and shrubs and trees that could do whatever you want them to do in your yard, whether it be a hedgerow or just a really bloomy flower garden or a pollinator garden. You could find them, and then also like not only just our native straight species, but also cultivars are really starting to churn out in a big way. So we're able to do things with with plants from the design perspective, then we're able to do more stuff than we ever have. And then finally, kind of going back to our plants that are suited for our locations, our natives, or at least really fibrous and deep rooted perennial plants are really great at filtering water, preventing erosion, and also they're able to handle things like salt inundation, which we sometimes get down here. When it comes to plants, their flowers exhibit these certain traits, and those are called pollinator syndromes. And with a pollinator syndrome is essentially over many, many, many years and decades and centuries, the pollinators that visit plants have slowly had a hand in designing what those plants are going to be looking like. So depending how big your flower might be or little, what shape it might be, if it's a tube or if it's a big open flower head, if it blooms in the morning or it blooms in the evening or it blooms in the spring or fall, all of these traits that flowers have are built around working with a pollinator that's going to best be able to pollinate it. And sometimes out in like the tropics, you find a really extreme example where one hummingbird is only able to pollinate one flower, but here usually it's not that crazy. In this example on the screen, there's an iris in here, and if you look, you can see these yellow stripes right in the middle of the petals, and that, from a bee's perspective, is like a runway saying follow this line and get right into that nectar source. Um, and here's some other great examples on this screen. So top left is coral honeysuckle, really cool native vine. It doesn't get too big, and it's an evergreen, and it is a really prolific bloomer as well. So a lot of people would be well thought out to have this in their yard. And little tubeless, tube flower, scentless, since birds don't smell, they don't need to use those resources from the plant's perspective to attract a bird, and that is hummingbird pollinated. And then bees really like big open landing zones. So Stokes aster, and then there's a swamp sunflower on the bottom of the screen. Those would be really bee-centric flowers. And then sometimes you have oddballs like the sweet shrub on the bottom. That's the flower doesn't quite open all the way, and a little beetle wiggles its way in there and gets into the flower. And I think those are mainly their scent kind of shows up right as it gets dark, and that is when the beetles are active. Other quick examples in here is going to be white blooming flowers that their nectaries start to produce at nighttime, and these are often pollinated by moths in the night. And then the top one on the right is going to be your milkweed. And I'm pretty zoomed in here so you can tell it's a tube, but usually the flower looks kind of flat, but that is another tubular flower, and butterflies like that. And when we talk about those pollinator syndromes, we get to know the plants and the insects and the other pollinators that might come to them. As a garden designer and somebody building something, you really, in a huge way, increase your odds of inviting those particular animals into your yard. And the same thing goes for our host plants, which is the larval food source for a lot of our showy butterflies. for all the butterflies. I'm about to show you a lot of our crowd favorites. But in the screen is going to be our monarch, and they only use milkweed, if you're not familiar with that already. Um, we have lots of different milkweeds. Commercially available milkweed, the species go down quite a bit. But on the screen, I have kind of like the top four that you'll see. I think somebody had mentioned like a tropical milkweed in there earlier.
Yeah,
That's
I was going to ask you about that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a kind of every once in a while a native plant uh, will bump into what is popular, the popular version of a not native plant, and this has happened in a big way with our tropical milkweeds. I think it's almost like there's an East Coast West Coast
Hmm.
debate about it. The reason people are don't want to use it is because it has the potential to host a parasite, which could then and get onto the butterflies, and then it will kind of affect them throughout the rest of their life cycles, and they'll pass it along. And then the other reason people aren't using it is because there is a little debate about whether it changes their migration pattern. The East Coast researchers say it probably does, and it's not a good idea, but there's a big West Coast population of butterflies, and those researchers seem to think that it doesn't necessarily have anything to do with it.
That's so interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the jury's out still. I
Huh.
think the sway is probably a little bit more in the favor of always choosing native plants,
Yeah.
which is a great mentality.
Yeah. And I
And
did just want to mention with the milkweed that we'll send out free packets to South Carolina residents, and I just put that in our chat too. And we hand blend the swamp milkweed, butterfly milkweed, and common milkweed, so it can be planted all around the state. So
which is awesome. So make sure you get on that and get some milkweeds.
definitely.
Yeah. Yeah, if you do have tropical milkweed, I personally I don't think it's the end of the world. The rule is like whether you have caterpillars on it or not at the end of the season, chop it down. Those caterpillars will be dying anyways, and that helps prevent the spread of those parasites and all sorts of things like that. But it is a food source, and you certainly could raise a lot of monarchs with it if you have it.
Thank you.
Next one up is our swallowtails, huge group of very, very showy butterflies. Our state butterfly is the tiger swallowtail, which is this guy here. And each swallowtail has its own host plant. Who would have known? The one on the far left is the giant swallowtail. That's our biggest butterfly we have in North America, and they're huge.
They're so
And
beautiful. How big are they? Show again.
they're at least the size of my hand. I don't know.
Wow,
Yeah, size
that's
of a
amazing.
little smaller than a dollar bill, maybe. Um,
Right.
big guys, and they have a native host plant, the toothache tree, and our not native host are going to be citrus. So if you have
Huh.
citrus, whether you plant them in the ground or keep them in a pot, oftentimes you'll see the eggs get laid and the caterpillars come out. They look like bird poop when they're little, which is a really cool camouflage technique. And if you poke them, they'll shoot out these little red kind of horns, but don't mess with them too much. Black swallowtails, probably the most prolific thing you're going to see in your gardens. They use a lot of our herbs like dill and fennel and parsley, but we do have a native host plant as well, and that is the golden Alexander, and that's like a little ground cover that just kind of creeps out, has little yellow flowers on it. Some of the other butterflies, I won't kind of get too deep into them, but we have our zebra swallowtail, which uses a pawpaw, and the pawpaw is also not only a native plant, but a delicious fruit as well. And a lot of butterflies will use trees. So when you talk about a pollinator garden, technically speaking, your pollinator garden could be your entire yard, and those trees would fit well. But sometimes just having knowing that they're on your property or somewhere around, you are going to be hopefully seeing some butterflies in your near future. Other guys, purple passion flower is what you're looking at, and these are the fritillaries. And here in Charleston, and I wouldn't be surprised if it goes pretty deep into the state, but this is a really, really prolifically fast-growing vine. Gets a little bit of a late start, but then it's like it'll swallow a fence in a moment.
Yeah,
Um,
we have some a lot
you
in
do too?
Columbia.
Great. Yeah, so it's a super cool plant. Notoriously visited by these little fritillaries, and they don't lay one egg, they lay hundreds, and you pretty soon before you know it, your plant is annihilated, it's completely gone, with these little orange guys that are harmless to touch, but very well fed and very happy. And so you don't want to spray them. Like the flower is really cool, but then you switch. You trade up the flower for the cool caterpillars, and then you have this flurry of orange butterflies that are zipping all over your yard. And by the time they chew it to a nub, you shouldn't be even thinking about it because you have plenty of other flowers in your yard that you are busy looking at and things like that. So we have the variegated fritillary, the Gulf fritillary, and then this cool zebra longwing as well. It has like a white caterpillar. And you don't necessarily have to attract moth or butterflies. You could go for moths as well. These are some of the biggest moths we got here. The giant leopard moth, the imperial moth, and the Io. That big green, nasty looking caterpillar down there is the hickory horn devil. And it will eventually become the orange butterfly here, or the orange moth. But really cool things. These guys all pretty much eat trees. They're caterpillars. And if you have those trees in your yard, be on the lookout. And then we have even more butterflies. These guys are a little bit smaller, a little bit more different, but we have the viceroy, which is kind of that look-alike to a monarch. And then you could have grasses growing in your yard and still be a good host plant provider for some butterflies like this little orange skipperling. And then the hummingbird moth, or the sphinx moth, is a moth, but it looks kind of like a hummingbird. It'll zip back and forth, and that we use a little button bush, which is the plant in the bottom right that looks like little Christmas ornaments. That one's really well at home in like a wet area. So that's kind of it for the plant component. And like I said, when you are selecting your plants for your pollinator garden, as we start to create and design, we could have a big say in who might be visiting our gardens from the animal perspective, which is really fun to think about instead of just being completely random about it. When it comes to design, here on the screen are some good garden tips from a pollinator garden design perspective. And we want to iterate that we are gardeners too, and we are part of that neighborhood that we're building in our yards. And so pick plants that you like. Don't pick stuff that you think is like dumb. Other people like it. They're not dumb, but if you don't like a plant, don't put it in your yard. You got plenty of options, and have some fun with it. When we're putting things in there too, I'm always a big fan of doing like one and one and one and one and one and having tons of different species. But from a better impact perspective, you could plant in blocks, and by having multiples, you give the pollinators a little bit of an easier time finding what they're looking for. Also, the biggest thing of all is we want to make sure we are going to be having flowers in every season of the year. So don't fall into the trap of going to the store and getting only things that are blooming. Because if you do it right now, by the time summer comes, you might not have any flowers again. Not a bad thing. You can come and visit a garden center again and do a round 2 and a round 3. But if you do it that way, don't forget you're not done yet. You're also looking for heights. You want to have like lots of layers and habitat for the animals. And then finally, I always like to add a water source to my yard. I put in a pond once, and I think the number of animals and insects that were visiting my yard almost doubled overnight just by having that water source, which was really fun.
Neat. Yeah.
So it could be a little bird bath, it could be a little water garden, or it could be a pond even. So no matter how you do it, it's always a really fun way to get some more. And then this slide here, this is kind of like the more classic, just general garden tips that anybody might tell you, whether they use native plants or doing pollinator gardens or formal or whatever. So doing things in odds is fun. I highlighted the green so you can see they're kind of like duplicates of what I just told you. So yeah, let me move something real quick. Yeah, so we're wanting to do layers, having height and having low ground cover. All are different regions that certain insects might use in your yard are certain birds. So having a little protection areas and nesting spaces is always great. And then repetition, like I said, is a great way to not only show intention from a design component, but also to give our pollinators a little bit of an easier time finding the food that they're looking for. And then creating focal points, using curved lines, kind of having natural border edges. All of these things will make your garden look a little bit more put together, especially if you might be in an HOA or somewhere where people are going to be a little bit more critical of your journey into native plants. But they shouldn't be. Eventually, we'll see how cool it is and move on. Sometimes you just have to give them a little leeway and talk to some folks about our beautiful insects up there. So planting in blocks is important. They say like 3 to 5 plants if you can. Like I said, I like to plant in ones because I just like a lot of plants. And if you are putting them in the right spots and they're going to be happy, then they'll probably reseed or keep growing. So by doing that, you could eventually have blocks. Otherwise, you can kind of get it right off the get go and do multiples of stuff. But well, I guess you guys could read the screens, but you can create easier foraging for the insects. A lot of them find their food by visual cues. So just having a huge block of one color will hone them into the right space. And then from your plants perspective, you're also increasing your pollination chances by having male, female pollen transferability because the bees aren't going elsewhere. They're going to get back and find what they're looking for. And then finally, one thing I think is really cool is bees use something called flower constancy. And that means they'll like wake up in the morning and they'll fly around and find a flower. It might take them a moment to like figure out how best to get in there and get that pollen. But once they do, they stick with that same species of flower for as long as they can. And if you have a lot of stuff in your garden, obviously they're going to have to skip a few things to get to what they're looking for. The biggest take home of all is make sure you have flowers in spring and summer and fall, and you have somewhere for the plants to, or the insects to overwinter. So you're looking for things in all seasons. The next 4 slides are going to be our spring, summer, winter, fall, kind of like a slideshow of just really cool plants that you might want to add to your garden. This is kind of just a little show and tell. So top right here in Charleston, these guys are just blooming now, are native azaleas. And this is a Florida
Beautiful.
flame, and they're super pretty. Usually you kind of see them on the edges of woodlands if they're out there naturally, but gorgeous. They tend to bloom before the leaves come on, which makes them even more striking than that. Right in the middle here is a spiderwort. Spiderworts, really cool, really prolific plant. Sometimes you might find them just popping up in the middle of your yard, and that's great. That means you can go out and dig them up and put them in your garden, so you don't keep mowing them or something like that. But good, really early nectar source. I think all parts are edible if you're interested in edibility. But a nice plant. Some people don't like them because they tend to bloom quickly, grow quickly, and then they get a little not ugly, but they look a little unkempt. And you can get around that by when you think it's too tall, you just go cut it in half, and then it will probably do its thing once or twice more, and you can kind of keep it looking a little bit more structured and formal. Our state flower is the Carolina jessamine, not to be confused with jasmine. And this is a really high vining plant. It's an evergreen, earliest harbinger of spring usually, and you'll see them up in the tree lines all over the place. We've got columbine, which is a little shady guy. That blooms now too. And then one of our favorites, and I often consider almost like a replacement for liriope. This is a blue-eyed grass, and it's not a grass, but an iris. So it gets maybe 6 inches tall, 8 inches tall at most, but it's a really prolific bloomer in the spring. And you can kind of divide it and chunk it out and use it for pathways and kind of have a little bit more of a formal use of it in your garden. And then finally, redbud, great small tree. A lot of people with small yards are looking for small trees, and this is the goodie. Yeah, beautiful plant. and this too flowers before it leaks out, which helps it become even a little bit more showy. Summertime is when our butterflies are finally getting up and running. So you see a lot more butterflies around and a lot of bees and all the insects just busy foraging. On our screen here on the top left is salt marshmallow. This guy is a cool one. It's in the hibiscus family. And this guy is a salt tolerant hibiscus, which is really cool. Maybe gets to be 6 feet tall. It's a pretty tall one. Next to it is a phlox, and phloxes, many of them bloom kind of late spring. This is a little bit more of a summer bloomer, but they're kind of short, great addition to any pollinator garden. Kind of fits right in, maybe in that 2 or 3 foot range. And then blanket flower here on the coast. These are prolific dune species, but they do fit right along in any sort of garden. The more rich you make it, sometimes they might not live as long. For some reason, that comfortability makes them a little bit more short-lived. But great plant, super long bloomer, maybe one of the longest bloomers we have of our native plants that we sell at the nursery. Next in, Stokes aster. Most of our asters bloom in the fall. Stokes aster is a spring bloomer though, and it's got a huge, bigger than a $50 head on it, and great open landing pad for a bee. Next one to there is just the top of a plant. This is probably 8 feet in the air, the cabbage leaf coneflower. And it kind of keeps an evergreen clump of leaves that look just like cabbage, more or less. And then when it's time to bloom, shoots up a stem higher and higher and higher and higher. And just when you think it couldn't get any higher than that, the bloom finally, the bud forms in it, and you have like a big 6 foot in the air, a coneflower. Probably the OG when it comes to native plants being available to everybody is the black-eyed Susan or the orange coneflower. This variety I think is called Goldstrom, but they all more or less look like a black-eyed Susan. Wild indigo is another one. Baptisia is the name of this plant. And this guy is, I think, one of the very long-lived, maybe not the longest, but one of the longest lived perennials you could have, and these guys live up to 90 years. And each year it gets a bigger and bigger show, but wow. A great early season.
That's neat.
Yeah. And finally, Joe Pieweed, super great pollinator source, really likes to be on the wetter side of life. If you are growing it in kind of a more dry garden, sometimes if we have a drought, the plant will keep growing and growing, and then once it hits like that dry period, it'll like stop growing for the season. So if you can, just make sure they have a regular water source. It doesn't necessarily have to be like in a bog or like always wet, but you want it to be pretty regular.
And we're having a couple of really great questions in the chat.
Oh, sure.
We go back to
let me jump into the chat.
Too far away from spring. There's a question about blue-eyed grass sun needs.
Yep. Okay, I'm reading them. So blue-eyed grass does like things sunny. In my yard, I'm always kind of like trying things a little harder and harder on the plants just to experiment a little bit. And I'm certainly growing them just fine in I would call it almost a part shade versus part sun, part shade, just about the same thing, but it's pretty shady, and they're doing great. And despite the shade, which normally means less blooms, my blooms at my house are pretty prolific right now. So they're doing pretty good, but I think technically speaking, full sun.
Okay.
And let's see. Container gardens. That's kind of like its own topic. It's a little hard, just because there hasn't been a lot of people growing them. But I think normally when people do containers, they're usually aiming towards like annuals, just because of that root growth and competition in the pots. We grow all of our plants in pots, and they all do great. So maybe the solution for container gardening is to grow it for your season or whatever, and then when it's finally grown in and full and done blooming for your container, then you find a home for it in your garden, and you kind of keep using it as your little staging point. But there's plenty of great options for that one. Do nursery plants that have been sprayed with chemicals lose that effect when they come back year after? Yeah. So a lot of pesticides and herbicides and fungicides, they do certainly have a residual effect. Some are really short-lived. It's only when the plant is still wet with the chemical. Those systemic insecticides are kind of the more nefarious ones where you don't know they're there, and they do persist for quite a while. But if you know a plant's going dormant, and it's going to be dropping all of that above ground growth, that's a pretty big move on the plant's end, and it's probably when you can safely assume that pretty much all of that pesticide is going to be out of the plant. But even if it is an evergreen, or even if it doesn't go completely dormant, everything in the end has some sort of shelf life. I don't necessarily I'm not able to say that like with super confidence,
Mhm.
but I think certainly certainly year after year, at some point your killing properties are going to be gone. Um, why white wild indigo and not blue? Well, we have both species. So the white one is a really cool one. I think down here in Charleston, it performs a little bit better than the blue indigo, which is Baptisia australis, is the other one, the blue one. But they're both really cool, and we have even more than that, kind of like that pea-shaped plant family. Okay, keep on rolling.
Let's keep on.
All right. Here we are in fall, and fall is, from the pollinator's perspective, probably one of the most important times of the year, because this is when all of these insects are trying to bolster their energy supplies to make it through that winter that we're about to bump into. And so they are finding nesting sites. They're trying to get super fat, and this is when we really want to make sure we have a lot of nectar and pollen and just good food in our gardens. So don't skip out that fall bloom.
Okay.
On the far right is a wood aster. Like I said, most things flower much better in full sun. The wood aster is a little bit of an exception. It kind of takes it part shade and still is a really big flower show. And the asters in general is a huge family, and there's tons and tons of asters out there, and all of them are really good nectar sources for our insects. The one right in the middle is a little picture, but that is typically a really, really big bush that you'll see. The groundsel or salt marsh myrtle is a really prolific bloomer in the fall. If you're ever driving over a bridge or have like a good view of a sunny area, um, a lot of times in the fall, it'll be like a big white puff down below. And that is probably groundsel that you're looking at. But again, especially migratory insects and animals, they use this in a big way as they kind of continue their course down south to use it for their nectar sources. Beautyberry on the bottom slide, super pretty purple berries. Great show. The birds eat them sometimes. Sometimes they won't, but it is a food source for sure. And then here's another hibiscus, the scarlet rose mallow. We have several hibiscus that are native to the area. Well, I know they like to sell a lot of tropical hibiscus, but our hibiscus that are native are also super showy and really cool, and they'll come back year after year. Even though they go completely dormant, you won't see them, but they'll be back. Next one up in there is goldenrod. And goldenrod, if you don't know already, it doesn't cause allergies. It's the windborne plants that usually bloom right alongside it that are the culprits for your allergies. But goldenrod, great nectar source, got really huge pollen on it, and with the big pollen, that's not windborne. It's not getting into your nose. It's just being big and sticky and ready for an insect to come and eat it up. So don't worry about it giving you an allergy. And 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 again, kind of a general rule of thumb for, does that plant give me allergies? If it's got color on it and it's showy and big, it probably doesn't give you allergies because it is trying to be pollinated, and it has big sticky pollen for these animals to get. The windborne things that are very tiny and fly through the air a million miles an hour, those are the ones that are usually causing us problems. So there's that. Finally, Blazing Star. Some people, interestingly enough, think this blooms in the summertime. Down here, we have it blooming in our fall, but it's a great plant. takes drought areas really well. And it's a really fun one. It kind of blooms in almost a succession up all the way up the stalk. And then finally, winter. So winter is a time of rest. And while we do have plenty of evergreen things to keep your yard looking not completely empty, um, it's also not necessarily a time where we are looking to, from a design perspective, it's not a time when we should be looking to fill it with color. Um,
Okay.
you have obviously your evergreens like your hollies and your wax myrtles. Those are great food sources, like the holly, for instance. These produce berries, and the berries themselves aren't really great food sources. They're kind of like a little lean. So in early fall and early winter, the birds are off gathering like the better sources of energy, and
Hmm.
then it's almost like a final push to get you into spring. So these more often than not will be sticking on your bush through all the seasons. And then right towards the very end of winter, you'll notice the birds start to gobble them up and eat them. So it's a great food source towards the end of the season. Really important. And if you're looking to keep color in your garden, sometimes the hollies are a great way to do that because you know the birds aren't going to eat them right away. You can get a lot of cool fall color, and sometimes some of those leaves will stick around, like the Virginia sweet spire right there in the middle. And I put a yarrow in there. They don't normally bloom in the winter, but it is an evergreen. It's kind of like a frilly, cool looking leaf. So yarrows are great. And then the other three pictures down below are just the old dead seed heads on black-eyed Susan, Leatris, that purple one we saw a minute ago, and then these big, cool, bunchy grasses like this tannet grass over there. All brown, all black. They show structure and a lot of interest, but again, they're not necessarily giving you a colorful show because we don't need them to do that. Um, yeah, I'll get a little bit more into my winter talk in just a little bit. Um, the next bunch of slides are from like a design perspective, just a big show and tell of plants. I don't necessarily know how we're doing on time right now. How we doing?
So we're at about 12:52, so we probably need to kind of roll through these a little
Okay.
quicker.
Okay, I'll roll through them super
I've been
fast.
asking questions too, so.
Yeah. So like I said early on, and I'm going to get into here, we have really, really cool native plants, and you could find a home for them for even the most strict and kind of like cutthroat designer. So we have plants that are red, yellow, orange, blue, white. They go high, they go low, they're ground covers, they're hedgerows. If you name it, you could find a space that it might fulfill your needs for. And don't be shy about looking into things and trying to experiment a little bit. So in a really fast forward way, Turk's cap hibiscus, another hibiscus, really prolific bloomer. These flowers don't open up all the way. Little hummingbirds will kind of come in and like dip their little beak right in the middle of that tiny little hole opening on the top. Some of these things we saw a little bit ago, like our coral honeysuckle, our bee balm, Indian pinks, our hollies. Oranges and yellows are also prolific, and you can find them all over the place. Like our goldenrod, here's a spice bush. This is the host plant to the spice bush swallowtail. Crossvine is another high vining plant. Pretty solid bloomer when it is, and it has a tendency to be a little bit evergreen, which is nice if you are trying to get it to grow up a fence or something like that. Also handles shade pretty well. Another one of our native fruits is our persimmon, and usually people are eating the Asian persimmons, but our native persimmon is good if you let it get completely ripe. If you don't, give one to your friend and watch him pucker up on you. But great plant, really good food source for wildlife in the late fall, and even you'll sometimes see these sticking on your trees into the early winter. Here's our butterfly milkweed, again, host plant to the monarch butterfly. And then on the bottom screen, we're looking at Coreopsis. This is, for us, it just started blooming maybe like 3 days ago. But it's tends to be a really good seeder. So if you have a big area and you have some plants, open sun, kind of exposed soil, these guys will be really happy, and your population of Coreopsis will grow and grow. And it's just a really nice cherry plant. early spring. We got blues. We have our Joe Pye weed, our Stokes asters. Here's the Baptisia, the purple one we talked about a little bit ago. And then we also have another native fruit, the blueberry. Vaccinium ashii and Vaccinium corymbosum are two blueberry species that are kind of the commercially available blueberries that you get in the store. So if you're trying to stack all these functions of different plants in your yard, it never hurts to add fruit that we could eat too. Here's another picture of our blue flag iris, and then that panic grass we looked at a little bit ago that was dead and kind of just showy. Here's the summer version of it. And then we got our whites. We have our rain lilies and our spider lilies, a fringe tree. This is another really small tree, great for a yard. These guys could handle shade pretty darn well. And another name for it is Granty Graybeard. And when they're blooming, it's almost like it almost looks out of focus and how bloomy it is. It's a really cool tree. Clethra is kind of a shady plant. Handles water pretty well too, but it's a really pretty smelling lower shrub that you might be interested in for maybe a foundational planting or somewhere that you can't really handle too much height. And then here we are again with the button bush, and there's a little hummingbird moth visiting it. Okay, so through that slideshow. When it comes to installation, there's really not too much of a difference between the native plant installing and just kind of like general rules of installing. So don't be shy about doing that. We always want to make sure our plants are really healthy. If you could help it and you're doing things for pollinator gardens, obviously we care a lot about systemic insecticides and things like that. So get it from a reputable nursery. Ask those questions, especially if you're trying to feed wildlife, to see what you're working with. And then if they give you a bad answer, don't feel like you have to buy something. Then look for a little bit longer. We want to generally pick out our plants, go buy them before you dig your first hole. Lay them out. Make sure they're nice and spaced apart. You don't want to dig half of your landscape design and realize you put them a little bit too close and you ran out of plants. So a quick little layout is great. And then you only want to dig your holes like slightly wider than your root ball. I think there's been a lot of changing on the topic, but the new general way they're saying to plant is to not really amend the soil that you're backfilling the plants with. I still do it because it makes me feel like I'm doing something good, but I'm usually pretty lean on it.
Okay.
I think that the new way is to just kind of like top dress with compost or some other amendments if you want to. But again, there's no wrong way to do it. There's maybe a slightly better way. And compost is pretty safe in general. And the way I like to think about it too is when we're doing our native plants, they're great. They're going to be in a habitat that they are happy in. And while, yes, you can plant them directly out there in the wild or in your yard or somewhere else and leave them unattended, if you give them a little extra love, especially when you're just getting them established, you're going to have a much more flowery, much better neighborhood that you're building from the get-go. So a little extra compost, a little mulch, all that kind of stuff is going to be a good thing, especially if later on down the line, you're planning on being more hands-off about it. When it comes to maintenance, this is all, again, pretty standard. Watering deeply and infrequently is going to help encourage root growth. When you're first planting something out, make sure you water regularly for like a week or so. And upon planting too, when you first plant something, water it like as soon as you possibly can. A lot of plants have these big fleshy roots that you could see, but on the tips of those roots are even more fine feeder roots and these little things that you almost wouldn't notice. And all those have to do is touch really dry soil and like they kind of shrivel up almost instantly. So if you have a big planting, take a break every once in a while and water it in stages. Some people, if it's really dry, when you dig your hole, you might water before you can put your plant in there. Not a bad thing. It's just a little bit more messy. So water wisely, weed with care. I'm a big fan of mulch for weed suppression, but if you know something is going to be seeding and that's what you want it to do, kind of be a little bit more light about your mulch usage. Um, Try not to deadhead too much, especially when winter comes. That is, you're going to be a food source for a lot of birds. But sometimes, if you are trying to get your garden to be a little bit more bloomy at certain spaces, you can kind of do a quick little deadhead on them, and get maybe one more run of flowers. And then the biggest one of all, and again, this is like that winter move, is we have easily covered our spring, our summer, and fall just by just having a really big, diverse selection of flowers that bloom throughout all those seasons. When winter comes, here is an example of some classic Charleston things that people do. And top left is your crepe myrtle, strongly pruned. On the right side of that is a big, really formal garden. I think those are boxwoods in there, trimmed and chopped, and all the leaves are raked up. And below is some sweet grass, muley grass in there, again, chopped down to a nub. So somebody, December came and somebody's like, oh, all the things are stopped growing, time to chop away. And they've chopped and thrown and done all they could to make their yard as tidy as they could possibly be. And uh, and then on the other side is the opposite. So one is somebody leaving their leaves or bringing them back into their garden bed, and maybe they're raking them out of the yard. Top right is going to be probably just a really nice pollinator garden, all finished up for the season. All those things are dormant. Um, and in there are a lot of old stems, and that is where a lot of our cavity nesting bees will lay eggs to overwinter, and they'll be hatching out of that. And then below is another picture of our muley grass that hasn't been decapitated. Both of these, if you ask me, are ugly. Winter. I'm a spring guy. I like spring. I like lush growth. I like activity of insects and things like that. So my big argument is, like, you're looking at ugly and you're looking at ugly, and choose the ugly that is actually going to be useful to our wild world around us, and don't choose the ugly that you have to look at, like, choppy things all winter long, because it's not pretty on the left, and it's not pretty on the right. um but you're doing something really good on the right side of things. so
That's
um
great.
so don't clean up your garden. Don't worry about it, and wait until, usually end of March is a great time to finally do your chops. That is when it's been warm enough for those eggs to kind of hatch out, or those insects to start becoming active again. And if you don't wait for it, you essentially dig up your entire population of insects that you've hosted, and thrown them in the compost heap. If you do, there's always nuances all over the place. I think if you do end up having to chop and you do have to clean up, don't put it on the curb and don't get rid of it altogether. You can kind of create a snag, is what they call it. And that is just a spot in the back of your property where you preserve those cut stumps and limbs, and you have a space for insects to overwinter and hide and do it all, even though they might not be in that original space. They're still doing something good, instead of being composted by the county or whatever else you might do to them. Okay, and that's it. These are my most important things, but
Okay.
we talked about them at all.
And we did have a question in the chat earlier about good deer resistant plants. Do you have a couple of recommendations about that?
Um, get back here.
Oh, and I think we might have a few more slides at the end that we added to the
Oh yeah.
presentation.
Yeah, great deer resistant plants in general are, the answer is, it depends on your deer.
Okay.
So on some of our barrier islands, the deer are really, really hungry, and they'll kind of eat almost anything, even though it's known to be deer resistant. But normally, anything that has a scent to it is typically not favored by deer. So
Okay.
your bee balms, your mountain mint, your what else is scenty? Things like, well, anyways, bee balm and mountain mint, and if you can crush a leaf and it smells, the deer probably aren't going to mess with it too much. The other one
Okay.
is, they don't tend to favor our native grasses, our big guys. So grasses are usually a safe bet for the deer. And I once had a guy, a longtime landscaper, tell me that what he would do is he would have a grass, and then he would plant something that he knew the deer liked pretty close to the grass. So as the deer's head is coming in, the the grasses would kind of like poke it in the eyes, and the deer would kind of get out of there. But it always depends. They're also kind of foragers in general, and they're curious animals. So sometimes what you could do is you could plant something, and even though the deer aren't going to really want to eat it in the long run, they'll taste it off that first night or that first week. And if you go ahead and spray like some deer away and that first planting, you might just get the deer to more quickly move on and leave your garden alone. But deer are
Okay.
animals and they're hungry, so sometimes you just never quite know.
Yeah. Thank you. All right. And then if you don't mind, I'll go over the next slide on
Yeah,
additional resources.
sorry about that.
So we will include all of these in an email to everyone who signed up for the webinar, but I just wanted to mention again that we'll send out free native milkweed seeds to South Carolina residents. And also that SCWF has a certified wildlife habitat program, which is also a great resource. And then I think a lot of people are probably familiar with the South Carolina Native Plant Society, but that's just such another wonderful, great resource to have too. And
Yeah.
I
And I'll
think
add on that
we'll
native,
include.
yeah, on the Native Plant Society too. It's also a really great way to meet local people that are
Yes.
also really interested in doing what you're doing. So if you don't have a good native plant nursery, sometimes that's the best source to get the plant material that you're looking for as well, or at least they'll know exactly how to point you in the right direction.
Yeah. And Dave, thank you so much for sharing your expertise. Like really, I'm so inspired now to go to create a pollinator garden, and the plants are just so beautiful too that you shared with us.
Yeah.
Really, really appreciate it. And we have one more slide too. And if you would like to give us some feedback and let us know how we did, we're always trying to improve, and that really does help us. So please do let us know. And also, if you'd like to follow us on social media, we put out really good content, and we'll always share positive information about things you can learn about native plants and other things. So let me just double check there wasn't another chat question. I think we got so many good ones. Oh, we did have a question I meant to come back to. Is ground sill invasive?
Um, well, native plants aren't invasive, but they
Okay.
could be aggressive.
Okay. Aggressive. So
So
that's
so
that one.
groundsel typically it's like a pioneer species. So if you have
Okay.
bare open soil and like full sun, something is begging to grow there. And because those seeds are usually pretty fluffy and kind of airborne,
Okay.
they oftentimes will be the first thing in there to colonize. So if you have a big, again, it's like, do you have it planted yet or not? Because nature's trying to plant
Okay.
there. But if I would
Okay.
say if you have a shady garden, no. If you have a really sunny, empty space, aggressive.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Dave. Really appreciate your time, and looking forward
Yeah.
to getting this up on YouTube too. So thank you
Thanks so
so
much,
much.
everybody.
Yeah, thank y'all. Bye.
Have a great day.
Hey, y'all too. Bye.